Well, dispatch number two of the war in Europe. Jen, I want to just lead off by doing purely just a bit of housekeeping before we get into this. First of all, we're under time pressure today. This is my fault. I got a bunch of 7-year-olds. I got to get on the ice for a hockey game. So journalism will not go undone. It will just go done concisely.
We should impossible. I don't believe it's possible that the two of us can do a video concisely.
Oh, we're gonna have to today, or else I'm just gonna have to turn it off and then walk out. It'll be you in the San Francisco Starfleet headquarters skyline. We're gonna take some time off too, and the timing is terrible. We don't want to be taking time off right now when the news cycle is so busy, but we're parents of young kids and the March break holidays coming up. So you were going to run the shop next week, so we'll still be in business next week. With this dispatch will go out Friday or Saturday. The readers can look forward to another week after that. We're both off the week after.
There's just no way we can actually run anything with 2 young children.
Yeah, that's what it's March break, and we both got young kids, and we don't have the depths of staff to keep even a skeleton crew running. So
we are a skeleton crew. This is it.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not even a full skeleton. We're like half a skeleton.
We're like when like an anthropologist finds an archaeologist finds like bits of bones, and they're like, "Ooh, what could this be?"
Yeah.
Before we get into the context of the war, which most of what we want to talk about today is the war, it's actually worth probably putting right at the top. You and I are having a bit of a laugh earlier, and I actually wrote an entire column for TVO this week that basically touches on this. A whole hell of a lot of stories over the last few months, like forget even the last few weeks, have completely consumed our attention. Dead. Move on.
Yeah.
You know, it has been 14 weeks since the floods in BC.
Oh, right.
Like,
forgot about that.
Like, exactly. 3.5 months. So BC floods, Omicron wave, supply chain worries from both, trucker occupation in Ottawa, inflation, Emergencies Act, war in Ukraine. That's the last 14 weeks.
Been busy. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah. So basically, this is and you and I were quite disappointed because we had a couple of really great little pieces lined up.
Yeah.
And then the war in Ukraine happened, and it was like all of this is no longer topical, and nobody cares.
If we had a week between truck convoy in Ukraine, we would have had some stuff.
Would have been a great week, but we did not have a week. We had 8 hours. So yeah, I mean, the three big stories that we're no longer talking about: COVID, war in Ukraine has totally wiped COVID off the map, and then also if you just look at the graphs just around the world, I mean, maybe the best way to tell the story is just to show the COVID rates from like 8 random countries. Radical spike, decline, radical spike, decline, radical spike, decline.
What we expected for something as contagious as Omicron.
It's exactly what we would expect. It basically indicates that Omicron burned through all of these populations and then burned itself out. And like, frankly, the interventions made little to no difference because countries, even with radically different interventions, saw exactly the same thing. The only real difference appears to have come in vaccination rates. Of course, under-vaccinated nations suffered a slightly higher death toll. But, absent another variant, we're done now. So I don't knock on wood, we could get another variant, but COVID appears to be very much yesterday's story, and we've all moved on.
Mentally, we have moved on. It's remarkable to me.
Yeah.
People, with the exception of the holdouts, the people who I think are now kind of psychologically locked in. I'm just saying anecdotally, look, like I don't have any problem wearing my mask. Ontario's vax passport mandate just lifted, so I'm gonna have to get used to not showing that. But my life is basically back to normal. Hockey tournaments, movies, dinners out, pretty much normal life here.
Yep.
There are going to be people who are psychologically locked in and have a hard time moving on. I am very aware of the fact we could get another variant, but until we do,
we're moving on. And we need the break. I mean, there's something of almost about the war in Europe that has put a lot of other issues into perspective and has served as something of a palate cleanser. I mean, here in Alberta, we got rid of the vax passports a couple weeks ago, and as of this week, we have no more masks. So I remember, like, I went out to Earl's the other day and like forgot that we didn't have masks, and I was wearing a mask for like 20 minutes and going like, wait a minute, I can see everybody's face again. Like, what? So anyway, like, it's just
Earl's. Is that weird chain? That's all. It's like.
That's correct.
Yeah, it's all in Western Canada. I don't think there's anything out here.
No. Anyway, point being is that yes, COVID is no longer story. The trucker convoy went from being all-consuming international story to to like nobody cares within 24 hours. I
yeah,
love
the
all
American
the people.
convoy. Like the guy showed up in Washington, no one there.
Like
there was a whole stage with one dude on it with his wife and kids. That's it.
Yeah, whole thing just completely faded into nothing. The other interesting thing is that there's a lot of people who were against the convoy who showed pictures of all these freedom fighters in Ukraine and were like, "This is what a real freedom fighter looks like." And I was just going like, "Yeah, but that's what a real occupation looks like too." So like, I just think that Ukraine's just made all of this stuff seem petty. Bluntly, I think it's put risk into perspective for a lot of people, and I think it's put bad into perspective for a lot of people, and it's really hard to get worked up on either side of a lot of these culture war divides in the face of what we're seeing across our news feeds every day.
Well, we weren't trying to be dicks about this, but like one of the things we were talking about even during Ottawa, like even before Ukraine had started, was some of the rhetoric from Ottawa. I was there. It was incredibly noisy, disruptive, intimidating. I get all that, not denying that at all. But the rhetoric was on the level of we are an occupied city. Even at the time, without trying to be a dick about it, I was saying, guys, there are people in Ottawa who have lived through occupations. Like there are Canadians alive today who have moved to this country from war-torn lands, who probably think that you sound completely insane. There are Canadian veterans who have served in war-torn lands who put up with a lot worse than honking horns. And then Putin, the asshole, decides to go out and basically put a little exclamation point on that for us, right?
Yeah.
The other thing related to that, there was one more story that we were talking about. I'm totally blanking on it. Something else that just got totally blown out of the water by Ukraine.
Floods in BC would be the third one I'd probably throw into that mix, although that seems to have been mostly cleared up. I still think supply chains and inflation are going to continue to be ongoing slow drag issues, so I wouldn't add that to the list. But
oh gosh, I just think imagine what oil prices are going to do to inflation already.
Within them, I mean, our my husband and I's prediction is that things are going to start to get, well, I don't know if you've noticed, like the wheat prices, for example, the wheat and corn prices are at like 120-year highs.
Oh, Ukraine's the breadbasket of Europe. Yeah.
Now, this is going to be great for Alberta. High oil prices and high wheat prices are like, mwah, mwah, mwah for us. But things are going to get real hard in a lot of the world, and especially in the very poor parts of the world where food is going to become very scarce, very unaffordable real quickly.
You can all toast your renewed prosperity at Earl's. Who was it? It was Ken Bosenkool a couple months ago wrote that piece for us that said like an economic turnaround in Alberta could save Kenny despite the deep shit he's in. And I don't know if Kenny will be saved or not, but God, I know the fates are going out of their way to like make that happen for him. An agricultural boom and an energy boom at the same time, right as COVID drops off. Couldn't be better luck if you're Jason Kenney.
Couldn't be better luck, but we'll see if he can actually make it happen. So anyway, I think that the stories that COVID basically made go away would be an interesting and fun little blurb. So I can do that.
Sure. Okay. We had written down, I mean, look, we're not war correspondents. We're not over there. I did check. Our insurance policy would forbid us from being war correspondents. We would need to get a rider. What? Yeah.
Oh.
We could get supplemental coverage, but our existing, it sucks. But anyway, we are watching this war from afar. We're bringing our own unique insights to it. Like I bring sort of a historical flair to it. You wrote a great piece this week about the propaganda and how this is playing out in the online space. One of the things you and I have both noted is sort of the continuing, my inbox is full of this. Like the idea that NATO expansion somehow forced Putin's hand. Do you remember how like for years, liberals only ever wanted to talk about Mike Harris?
Yeah.
It's like NATO expansion is Russia's Mike Harris.
Yeah. So I think that there are three, this is a very old, very trotted out argument. And like the question of like whether or not NATO's expansion has provoked a response or provoked a retaliatory response here is something that I honestly think that historians will be debating for 40 years. Like this is there is no one answer or two answers. Like, you know what I mean? Like this is going to be just a debated topic for many, many years to come. But I think that there's 3 points that I would raise in response to that. The first is that this, particularly coming from Americans, really bothers me because once again, it makes Americans the main characters of history. It's all about us. It's solipsistic. It presumes that essentially Putin's only motivation, it has nothing to do with domestic politics. It has nothing to do with his own issues. It has nothing to do with his
own worldview,
ideology,
Russian history,
his own worldview, Russian history. All of that doesn't matter. What matters is that America.
What America did.
What America did, right? Like
America.
And this is especially frustrating coming from a Canadian perspective, because of course we're also a part of the NATO alliance. Because from a Canadian perspective, we're a country that borders America and Russia, technically, and our options as a middle power are NATO, Russia, China, or independence. We will choose NATO 900 times out of 1,000 because of course we will, because as free people, we're not fucking insane. Like whatever flaws and issues you want to lay at America's feet. And believe me, I protested the war in Iraq. Like there's no shortage of them. We will choose the NATO alliance every single time. And so will every free person. So will every free person in every democratic society. So that's nuts.
I'm just picturing you waving a no oil war placard because you would have been in high school during.
I was and also in my 20s. Thank you. But yes, I protested in front of the American embassy. I protested all of these things. I took pictures. My first photographic assignment was taking pictures of an anti-war, anti-Afghanistan protest. I was into Adbusters at that age, man. I was a radical. Anyway, point being, the second point I would make about the NATO stuff is it's the problem with this argument that Ukraine can be put at the feet of NATO is that it's so easy to come up with an equally unprovable counterfactual, and that is, what if NATO's expansion has actually curbed further Ukrainian aggression as opposed to causing this one? I mean, is it a coincidence that Russia feels empowered to go after the non-NATO allied country at a moment when the West is sort of at a historical weak point? Are these coincidences? Probably not. And the last point I have in all of this, and I mean, you made this point, and that is to paint NATO as some kind of imperialist expansion project is to overlook the fact that this is a military alliance that free people have freely chosen to be part of. NATO did not go into the Baltic states and put guns to their heads. They didn't conquer these countries. And a lot of these countries also are former Warsaw Pact countries. So they have firsthand experience of exactly what being under Soviet domination is like. And we didn't put a gun to their head and force them into our alliance. They chose it. They were free people who freely chose being part of our military alliance.
I think that's the key point. No, I mean, the whole NATO expansion forced Putin's hand, bad America, blah, blah, blah. There are tens of millions of people in Eastern Europe who have lived under Soviet domination and who never, ever want to do it again. To them, NATO was something they could not join fast enough. And to be honest, there are some of the heavy lifters in NATO. Some of them are small countries, but on a per capita basis, they more than pull their weight. It's some of the flakier Western decadent democracies, Western European or Canada as well, that don't. We are very lucky to have Eastern Europe in NATO right now. And they're there because they chose to be, and they chose to be.
They can leave anytime they want.
Yeah, no, they're there because they know, because they had no illusions about the kind of world we were living. I shouldn't. Speaking of illusions, this wasn't on our list of topics. Did you see Brennan's tweet, the old Star reporter, Badger?
No.
Oh God, where he's expressing his outrage at Cuba, saying, "I'm never going to spend another dime in your country because you sided with Russia at the UN." And I'm looking at that, I'm like, yeah, I'm really disappointed that Cuba sided with Russia over the West. Who'd have seen that coming? Gosh.
Shock. Wow.
How communist Cuba is siding with the Russians in a Cold War redux. Wow, what a mind-blowing thing.
You wanted to talk about the no-fly zone and why that's a bad idea.
I mean, it's a bad idea because it's going to cause a fucking war with Russia.
Right. Cool.
Ta-da! The end. A no-fly zone is not something that it can go, hey, guess what, Gerson? no-fly zone. Like, it doesn't work that way. Imposing a no-fly zone means declaring a section of territory as off limits to the military aircraft of another nation and then putting your own forces in there to enforce it. Now, there is one little wiggle to this that was proposed in another column I read this week, and I shared it with you, which is possibly for purely humanitarian reasons, the UN or the EU or some non-NATO organization could declare a protected area in Western Ukraine and say, because of refugees and humanitarian supply convoys, that we are declaring a no-fly zone, no entry to this defined area, and then either NATO or even contributions from some of the neutral countries in Europe, like let's say the Swiss Air Force, the Swedish Air Force, some non-NATO countries could contribute a small, I mean, we could get Australia in here. You know what I mean? Like, if it's a UN thing or I guess it would have to be the UN, to be honest. Basically goes, we're declaring a limited protected area for humanitarian reasons. Maybe the Russians could be shamed into keeping their jets out of a limited area. But if it's NATO just imposing a no-fly and we're doing it for the purposes of saving the Ukrainians, don't call it a no-fly zone. Call it an act of war. And if we, and this is a point I was making earlier this week, if you want to make the argument that NATO should join the war against Russia, I think that's wrong, but okay, let's have that conversation. But let's be honest about what that conversation actually is. A no-fly zone, except unless it's in this very narrow thing that someone else would have to do, a NATO no-fly over Ukraine is an act of war.
Well, and let's also be blunt, like even a humanitarian corridor of some kind, Russia isn't going to agree to because it's going to become an arms corridor, and it will be.
The only question would honestly be like what Russia is going to agree to is going to depend on how the next few weeks go for Russia. The other thing, and again, I'm just moving it along because I got to get to that hockey game. One of the things, some of the stories that have been pouring out of Ukraine, I just find very interesting. And I want to be careful about this because we're looking at two things happening at once and it's hard to tell them apart. One of them are genuine stories and genuine journalism coverage. Others are torqued social media accounts and either fake news or manipulation of real events for nefarious purposes. And both of these things are happening at the same time. It's about racism in Ukraine and how non-white people have been subjected to abuse, harassment, violence. They've been left behind. They haven't been prioritized for evacuation. And you and I don't want to be unduly blunt about this, but if you're shocked to find racism in Eastern Europe, I don't know what to tell you. Like, these are not multicultural societies on the model of the West. We've talked so many times.
Most Ukrainians do not have like the latest grad school level training on anti-racism, and you know, Ibrahim Kindi is not on the books of most Ukrainian shelves.
Look at European politics in the last 10 years or so. I mentioned it in my column, which we published Thursday. Angela Merkel lets in 1 million refugees, the overwhelming majority of them not white, into Germany, and it completely upsets German politics. Like, racism in Europe is real. It's not a thing. We're not pretending otherwise.
Well, and in Russia as well. Russia's not exactly a post-racial utopia either. Like,
and neither are we. Like, we're not here in the Western countries, but we're a lot better than they are because we actually have had pro-immigration, multicultural societies for 2 generations now.
Yes.
They don't.
No.
And the thing that so some of this stuff is undoubtedly hard in the right place, sincere reporting of genuine problems. We're not just because we're saying duh doesn't mean we think it's good. Obviously, racism is bad. Obviously, people being left behind because they're not white is bad. But what did jump out at us is how some of this stuff is being folded into the information campaign against Ukraine, which is
Ukraine is getting what it's coming because, and Russia's just going in to denazify it because I'm a tanky and therefore I'm reliving some kind of fantasy of World War II in which the good guy Stalin is going after the bad guy Nazis.
Or like, on top of that, why are we giving arms to people in a racist country? And the ugly truth of this, like the idea like, oh, so Canada's giving missiles to Ukraine. Well, did you know Ukrainians are sometimes racist? Yeah. I'm giving them missiles anyway because they have
Did you
Russians
know that
still.
there's a neo-Nazi military brigade in the Ukrainian army?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, no,
So,
that history has been pretty widely understood at this point. Yes.
so we're not denying that there's a problem. We're not, but we're also saying the problem is being exploited by people who do not wish Ukraine well. And that's fine, I guess. The other thing that you and I talked about.
Are there people fleeing for their lives who have expressed racist sentiments in the process of that fleeing? Yes. Are there also people who are trying to amplify that racism in order to obfuscate from the reason why those people are fleeing for their lives in the first place?
Yes.
Also, yes.
And the other thing is as well, you and I talk about this kind of an intersectional implosion here. There's a lot of people out there who are probably really uncomfortable rooting for a country of white people because that does not align with their concept of systems of oppression. Like
white people are always the oppressors.
An Orthodox Christian white nation at war with an Orthodox Christian white nation does not blow my mind. But there are some people out there who do not have a ready formula to plug that into, and you can see it because some of the
this challenges a lot of the intersectional orthodoxies, right? Like, and there's if you sort of accept that the facts of this particular conflict on the ground, you have to come to some conclusion about the fact that your intersectional orthodoxies don't necessarily fit in every single geopolitical context,
even if they
don't, which they don't bluntly. And also history is complicated, and you can't divide victim and conqueror according to modern racial lens. It doesn't always work that way, and it especially doesn't always work that way out of North America, where things are hugely rooted in a very different kind of history and past.
And the funny thing is, attempts to fit the entire world into that very comfortably North American worldview are just a weird form of intellectual imperialism. Why does this European conflict not fit the model that we have developed on campuses to explain racial dynamics in North America?
Well, and I think there's almost a weird analogy between, remember that Whoopi Goldberg gaffe where she was talking about how the Nazis weren't racist because it was just white people going after white people. Like, essentially that was her argument. Don't you see, like, there's a weird analogy between the sort of dismissiveness of Ukraine here, because you can't
Whoopi the next
idea.
I'm receiving new information. Apparently I said a dumb thing.
Yeah, pretty dumb. But anyway, there's a weird sort of analogy here where once you've gotten locked into this very North American specific grad school level social justice type of hierarchical thinking, it's really hard to fit real life into that, especially real life outside of, like where does China and Taiwan fit into this intersectional worldview here? It just doesn't.
There are perfectly rational explanations for that, but most of them aren't the ones being parroted by the tankies on Twitter. Like, there are some really smart thinkers who would be able to come up with a whole theory that explains this all.
But doesn't this all just like read to you like you're just trying to like stretch a saran wrap over a situation that doesn't quite fit your model in order to prove that your model works? Like it
Look, I mean, it's the almost overriding human failure that we're all guilty of in one way or the other. We're all hammers and the whole world looks like a nail. Yeah. And, we're different variety of hammers. I hate to say this because it's a terrible crisis, but I feel lucky in this crisis because I'm a Cold War historian and I'm a defense hawk military expert. Like, this is like, ooh, this is ticking all my boxes. I can actually talk about this with some degree of expertise. But other people out there who have, I've talked about this before. A ton of the discourse in North American politics right now, like, could only take place in as highly developed and stable as the society as we've built here. I said to you earlier in the week, microaggressions are what you have time to worry about when you're not worried about macroaggressions. And right now, the people of Kiev are worried about macroaggressions because their city's getting fucking bombed by the Russians. Like, it is a very good thing for a society if you've got time to worry about microaggressions. I'm not denying microaggressions exist. I think we should probably do better at them. But if you're worried about those, you're probably not getting shelled by the Red Army.
You're probably not food insecure. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Um.
Anyway, it's just we've all lost. Like North Americans have just completely lost the plot. 3 generations.
I think that we've lost perspective on. I mean, we were talking about even this with in the context of COVID, where you and I were like, y'all realize how much worse COVID could be, right?
Well,
like this is not
expectations, right?
This is not like COVID's not the big bad. COVID's like kind of bad, and we're dealing with it, but like it's not the big generational evil that you're presenting it as, and it's just because like we're people who've lost perspective on how bad actually is.
Well, remember my column a few months ago. Our expectations are the problem, right? Like when you've grown up in a very peaceful, prosperous, and stable country, minor setbacks seem like catastrophes.
Yeah.
And then it kind of what we were saying earlier with Ottawa, right? Like the siege of Ottawa.
It was a military occupation, a blockade. Well, like
Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, actually called it a siege. Kind of became the accepted verbiage. I'm sure I probably used it a couple times myself when writing about this here.
But we were using it in a metaphorical sense. We didn't literally think that the truckers had literally occupied Ottawa and put it to siege. Imagine, they weren't cutting off food supplies. People weren't eating their children and rats. Okay, like that. It's not a literal. We were using that a military metaphor.
Or if they were doing by choice. Yeah, well, imagine Doug Ford describing what happened in Ottawa as a siege while that 40-mile long column of Russian military equipment heads for Kyiv. The only 2 items still left on my list, we kind of briefly covered both of them already. War correspondents. Very hard to find people on the ground in Ukraine right now. We are seeing I've been relying on my coverage on the BBC. They do have some people there. Obviously,
Globe and CBC both have people on the ground. Looks like they've learned their lesson from Kabul,
Afghanistan. Yeah, no, I was just going to say that. Who's there from CBC?
I don't know offhand. I just saw that they had on the ground. I think they've got 2 reporters on the ground.
That's what I was going to mention. How we actually are seeing that quite a few Americans are there, including some guys I know, and I'm worried about them, but I hope they're okay. I mentioned earlier our insurance. It would actually. Should I just ask her?
Could I go? Well, no, there's no way my husband is going to let me go. I've already discussed this.
No, me too. Not with your husband, with my wife. We could probably.
That would have been awkward.
I talked to your husband, you know that.
About me, right? That's uncomfortable.
Sometimes. No, not usually. Just about nerdy stuff. But we could probably go as far as the Eastern NATO countries, because that's not actually right now a conflict zone. But I mean, I know Marika Walsh of the Globe and Mercedes Stevenson of Global are both with the enhanced NATO forces in the Baltic. So like, I think that would be fine, but I think actually going into a conflict area, you would need separate insurance. One of the things I was just talking a few days ago, it's great that the CBC and the Globe have people there. But a couple of years ago, a guy like Matt Fisher or Christy Blatchford would have been on the ground immediately, right? Like, I don't know who the leading Canadian war correspondent is for this generation.
I so wanted it to be me. I was so wanted it to be me, and then I had to go get pregnant. Fucking husband.
Yeah, well, you know, it's your fault. You shouldn't have been sick the day they did sex ed. I know that crept up on you.
I know. It was a real issue. I mean, like in 15 years, I will be able to go be the leading war correspondent in Canada.
I mean, look, that's exactly it. Like, our kids are an extremely awkward age. If
I died right now in a war zone, it would be a problem.
It's not just that. It's just they're not at an age right now where, I mean, mine are a couple years older than yours, but it's like we're just not at a point where we can just drop everything and fly off. Like, me going to Ottawa for a few days was possible but disruptive, right? So, and that was Ottawa for.
I couldn't even get there until a Monday when I had childcare. It's a problem. So, these children of ours are a problem.
Not only that, though, but I mean, the cost of it, like the insurance costs alone, before you do war coverage, you have insurance. You also realistically need a team. Like, you and I just couldn't show up in Kyiv and be like, hey guys, we're here. Like, we would need a fixer, someone who speaks the local language and help us. We would probably need, especially if we're doing broadcast, we would need a cameraman or sound guy, whatever. probably in some of these areas you would want to be traveling with private security. Like it is extraordinarily expensive to do proper war coverage. That's why we see so little of it.
My husband and I, like, we had to talk about this, and like, if we did not have kids, he would be joining the International Foreign Legion, and I would be like dropping into Kiev, and it would just be, we would just do that as a couple. Like, we're that couple, we would do that. But then we had children, and he's
already got the beard.
He'd be so hot.
Yeah. So hot. I think it would be a good look for him. I will refrain from calling your husband hot on video. That would be awkward for everybody. Last item on the list, we've already covered a little bit when we talked about. Well, first of all, it's kind of a thread running through a bunch of our topics. It's run through the NATO is bad topic. It's run through the white people can't be invaded thing. Disinformation. Our buddy Tristan Hopper at the National Post this week was writing about Chrystia Freeland. I don't know exactly what it was. I read the story. Sorry, I read the story quickly. It was a scarf.
Russians have been going after Chrystia Freeland for her grandfather was a Nazi or something like that for years and years and years, which I think is actually true. I think her grandfather was a Nazi, but like,
or had some connection,
some affiliation or connection to yeah. But I mean, like, the sins of the son don't travel on the father, and like, I don't think that anyone can credibly think that Chrystia Freeland's a Nazi. Like, that's just nuts. But anyway, so she goes to a Free Ukrainian rally and winds up getting photographed next to a red and black scarf that said Slava Ukraine or something like that on it. Well, the red and black scarf is used by neo-Nazi groups who are active in Ukrainian politics. Like this is one thing that I think is little understood about Ukrainian politics. Not that I'm an expert, but there are active neo-Nazi parties. Svoboda is usually the banner under which they run. They are an extreme minority within Ukrainian politics. Like the Azov Battalion,
one seat in the 400.
Yeah, it's one seat of the Rada. The Svoboda alliance has one seat in the Rada. All right, and like
is it regionally apportioned or is it proportional?
No, I think it's proportional.
Okay.
But anyways, and then there's the Azov Battalion, which is one of those battalions that actually, did have a recruitment of neo-Nazis. There were neo-Nazis in the Azov Battalion, and they were essentially a private militia that started up in 2014 when Russia invaded Donetsk, or there was the proxy war in Donetsk and all that sort of stuff. They were actually financed, I believe, by a Jewish financier. But essentially, they got all the nationalists in the Azov Battalion, and then they were like, they threw all the nationalists right at the front lines and said, have fun with that. And then eventually the Azov Battalion was incorporated into the Ukrainian military. They've been allegedly depoliticized. I mean, that's kind of disputed, but like, you're talking about one battalion in an army of hundreds of battalions. Like, this is not, it's like saying that because the Svoboda has one seat in the Rada, that this is a neo-Nazi government. Like, this is, no.
Oh, there are people saying that.
That's insane. That's not there. Yes. There is an active neo-Nazi movement in Ukraine and Ukrainian politics, and it is also tied up with historical Ukrainian nationalism. That is present. It's a present undercurrent in a way that it isn't present here in North America. It's not a Nazi government. That's insane. Like, that's where you're getting where the Russian disinformation starts to get spun out of control. So anyway, Chrystia Freeland is caught getting a photo taken. Somebody had thrown this black and white scarf around her. She was obviously not aware that this particular color scheme had been used by neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And when somebody pointed this out to her, I think her staff immediately pulled down the picture because, of course, they didn't want to be associated with that. I mean, I think it's a question about whether or not the person putting the scarf on her or near her knew that the scarf had those affiliations. Like, it's a black and red scarf. Did they know what they were doing? Did they have those affiliations? Did they not? Or was it just a black and red scarf that had, historical connections to Ukrainian? Like, who knows, right? But like, I think to say that anyone carrying a black and red scarf in the Ukrainian context is a de facto Nazi, to me, that's a bit of a stretch. And I certainly don't imagine that Freeland would have known that, or she wouldn't have been seen photographed with it. Like, I just don't believe for a single second that that Chrystia Freeland has any truck with Nazis. And also, I would say, like, all of the people involved in the organization has totally denounced it. So like, no, we've got nothing to do with any far right radical. No. So like, you know, it's a thing. It's a thing, even in the Ukrainian diaspora, with like there's an undercurrent between, there's a weird sort of connection between Ukrainian nationalism and sort of fascism, and like there's a little bit of, there is that there. It's a present thing. You can't, it's not made up wholesale, but you can't go from that and say, well, everybody in the Ukrainian diaspora is a Nazi. Like it's that's nuts.
Well, no. Look, we wrote about this in a recent dispatch. When the Nazis swept through Central and Eastern Europe, a lot of people were happy to see them because living under Stalin was no picnic either. And,
right.
You know, the majority of Ukrainians fought under the communist banner and liberated the homeland, so to speak. Not all of them did. Some of them said, you know what, fuck Stalin. We're joining up with these guys. Couldn't be worse. I will leave it to everyone else to debate who was worse between Hitler and Stalin, but there were parts of the world where no one came out of that without some blood on their hands. It almost seems to me that we could kind of skip all the analysis, though, and just say, shouldn't we just lighten up on politicians if they get photographed with someone they don't know who ends up having bad links to something? Like, this is just such Bush League gotcha bullshit that, like, politicians who are, especially at public events, probably do 1,000 selfies. Like, a few of those guys are going to turn out to be scumbags.
Well, and then also, I mean, the big analogy here is Jagmeet Singh when he appeared at that rally that had the, forgive me, but I don't know, but essentially it was the pictures.
Sikh nationalist group or something.
Yeah, Sikh nationalist group. So like, there is always this weird undercurrent between nationalist groups and extremist movements, and it's really hard to separate that between you know, people just lionizing these national groups because they're expressing pride in their homeland, right? Like it's a really messy situation. And Singh got a lot of trouble for appearing at that rally. I will say, however, that the difference here is that Singh didn't really openly
address it. No, he kind
of ignored it. Yeah, he kind of ignored it. He didn't like condemn the terrorist group that he was supposedly photographed with, where it's pretty clear that Chrystia Freeland, like, she immediately got rid of the picture. She was like, they've been very open about, no, we have no affiliations with this. So yeah, it's complicated, it's tricky, it's nuanced, it's interesting, but yeah, I don't know if we really want to address that, because I think Tristan's piece actually did a pretty good job of pointing out that.
Yeah, we can just link to that, I guess. Sorry,
yeah, maybe just link to it.
Someone's calling me. I'm just disconnecting it.
Do you want to just? I mean, that's a hell of a hefty dispatch right there.
Yeah, that's a good meaty dispatch. Is there anything domestic we should be talking about? That's my only question, and we have exactly two minutes to answer it. Nothing jumps out at me.
No.
Ontario is now within 3 months of its next election. I don't care.
The budget is something that
we have 3 months to talk about that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right, moving on. So I will take the things that we are no longer talking about and NATO.
Yeah. Okay. Sure, I'll do oh my God, some Europeans are racist, and war
zone.
Correspondence.
How about no fly zone? I want. All right,
I'll do no fly zone. Oh my God, some Europeans are racist, and I'll do something short on war correspondence.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, even I could do war correspondence if you want.
Why don't you do a shorty on work? Like, I mean, I don't know. Let's just figure it out later. One of us or the other will do it. We'll also poke some of our buddies and see if they want to write anything. So I guess just to reiterate, so we will be in business one more week, and then we're shut down for a week.
I'll take care of it. I'll figure it out.
You're going to do great.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. You look moderately panicked there for a second, but
no, I'm just tired.
We're all tired. Anyway, just remember that what happened in Ottawa was a siege and an occupation. We now go live to Kyiv.
Right.
Anything else?
That's it.
Bye, everybody.
Pick up the kids. Bye.
Yeah.